Ah, hello friends, dear loved ones, those who have come today for the beautifulest of holidays.
Ooh.
It truly is that magical time of year, is it not?
Yes. 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 Ooh. Ooh.
You know
Alternatives.
Mm.
Ba, bug, and hum.
Ooh.
I don't believe it. Goodness, a humbug? On these finest of days?
Ah, yes.
Humbug.
December 22nd. My favorite time of year.
Finest of days. Well, a good friend, you know that this is a special time of year. What am I doing?
I don't know.
I really just thought I would just go into this. Hello, everybody. Welcome
Hello.
to the Kid Squids Christmas special.
Hi.
Hello.
I guess that's what we could call it, right?
I'm checking the rule book. There's nothing in the rule book that says we can't.
All right. It's our Christmas special.
Yay!
It's not our pan-religious, pansexual, personal pan pizza special?
It could be a
What?
personal pan pizza special.
Actually, I'm with Raw on this one.
All right. Well, I guess we just have to go through the script, find every instance of the word Christmas, and replace it with personal pan pizza. Just a quick revision. A little too late though. Hello, everybody. I feel like I've said hi like 8 times, but today we've got a very special tale. A tale from someone who has the same name as me, and I killed him for it. A beautiful Charles Dickens story about a time, a man who knew not what greatness Christmas brought with him.
I thought it was written by Kiddithy Squidithy.
Common misconception. See, what I did was just copy and paste a bunch of the book and bastardize it into a script for us to read together.
It's a pretty bad script, by the way.
Oh,
You've never been in a... It feels like you've never been in a production, even though I know you have been in productions.
I have. It's,
This
well...
is not what scripts look like.
No, it is not what a script looks like.
I tell you what, though.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in short films with worse looking scripts than this, so
It's
I'm happy.
All right. Who is playing Gonzo? Well, that would of course be yours truly. I will be taking the role of our storyteller for this fine evening. For
Was I the only one who highlighted
Still is me.
highlighted my roles? so sad.
Were you?
I've highlighted my roles in the list of who's playing what. So I'm just going to keep cross-referencing back and forth.
Beautiful.
Well, I highlighted every single name of every character I'm playing.
And I'm saying like 30%, no, like 60% of the script anyway, so I felt like it would be redundant for me to highlight anything.
Oh, yeah.
So, are we ready to have a most magical of evenings, a most beautiful of times, a most merry of pan pizzas?
It
I
is
suppose so, good sir.
Then without further ado, let's begin. Marley was dead. To begin with. There was no doubt about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed... We're already off to a great start. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead, of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legati, his sole friend, his sole mourner. And even Scrooge
His soulmate?
That's a good one. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with undoubted bargain. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood years after, above the warehouse door. Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Some people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fist hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. Secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheeks, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his lips thin blue. And he spoke shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head, and on his eyebrows, and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in dog days, and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye on his clerk, who in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and so surely as the clerk came in with a shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle. Yeah. We got a little echo on the microphone. What do we do about that? Whatever. In which effort, not being man of strong imagination, he failed. Oh shit, thank you for the $45 donation.
This story have my favorite Christmas
A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!
That's too much!
Thank you for the $45 donation. Quite a cheerful voice.
Yeah, a Merry Christmas to $45.
It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation that he is approached. Humbug.
Christmas a humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure.
I do. Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason do you have to be merry? You're poor enough.
Come then. What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough.
Humbug.
Oh, don't be cross, Uncle.
What else can I be when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas. Out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money, a time for finding yourself a year older but not an hour richer, a time for balancing your books and having every item in them through a rough dozen of months presented dead against you. If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should!
Uncle!
Nephew! Keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine.
But you don't keep it.
Then let me leave it! Much good may it do you. Much good it has ever done you.
There are many things from which I might say I have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say, Christmas among the rest. But I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time, when it has come round, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin. If anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they were fellow passengers to the grave and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me something good and will do me good, and I say, God bless it.
The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. Becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety, he poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. "Let me hear another sound from you," said Scrooge, "and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. You're quite the powerful speaker. I wonder you didn't go into Parliament."
Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow.
Scrooge said that he would see him, yes. Indeed he did. He went the whole extent of the expression and said that he would see him in that extremity first. He said,
But why?
Why did you get married?
Because I fell in love.
Because you fell in love, growled Scrooge, as if it were the one thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. Good afternoon.
Nay, Uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now?
Good afternoon.
I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends?
Good afternoon.
I am sorry, with all my heart, to find you so resolute. We've never had any quarrel, to which I have been a party, but I have made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So, Merry Christmas, Uncle.
Good afternoon.
And a Happy New Year!
Good afternoon! His nephew
God,
left
I
the room.
hate Spirited. Worst adaptation of Christmas Carol.
His nephew left the room without an angry word notwithstanding. He stopped at the outer door to bestow the greetings of the season to the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially. "There's another fellow," muttered Scrooge, who overheard him. "My clerk with 15 shillings a week, and a wife and family talking about a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam." This lunatic, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands and bowed to him.
"Scrooge and Marley's, I believe,"
said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list.
"Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?"
"Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night."
December 22nd. We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner.
It certainly was, for they had been 2 kindred spirits. As the ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned and shook his head and handed the credentials back.
At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessities. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir.
Are there no prisons?
Plenty of prisons.
And the Union workhouses, are they still in operation?
They are. Still, I wish I could say they were not.
The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigor then?
Both very busy, sir.
Oh, I was afraid, from what you said at first, that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course. I'm very glad to hear it.
Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the multitude, a few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink, and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt, and abundance rejoices. What shall I put you down for?
Nothing.
Oh, you wish to be anonymous.
I wish to be left alone. Did you ask me what I wish, gentlemen? That is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help support the establishments I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there.
many can't go there. Then many would rather die.
If they would rather die, they'd better do it, and decrease the surplus population. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentleman withdrew. Scrooge resumed his labors with an improved opinion of himself, in a more facetious temper than was usual with him. At length, the hour of shutting up the counting-house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted his tool and tactically admitted to the fact that the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed out his candle and put his hat on. "You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose."
If quite convenient, sir.
"It's not convenient, and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound." The clerk smiled faintly. "And yet you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work."
It's only once a year, sir.
A poor excuse for pickings a man's pocket every 22nd of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning.
I will, sir! I promise I will! Merry Christmas, sir!
Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no great coat, went down a slide on Cornell at the end of the lane of boys 20 times in honor for it being Christmas Eve, December 22nd, and then ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt to play at blindman's bluff. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in the chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile building up a yard, where it had been so little business to be that one could scarcely help but fancying it must have run fancying it must have run there when it was a young house, playing at hide-and-seek with other houses, and forgotten the way out again. It was old enough now and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being let out as offices. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. The fog and frost hung so low about the black old gateway of the house that it seemed that if the genius of the weather had sat in mournful meditation on the threshold. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it, night and morning, during his whole residence in that place. Also that Scrooge had little of what was called fancy about him, as any man in the city of London, even including, which is a bold word, the corporation, aldermen, and livery. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon. And then, let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It was not in impenetrable shadow as the other objects in the yard were, but had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. What? Lobster? Oyster?
Lobster.
There's a lot of shellfish in this. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred as if by breath or hot air, and though his eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. That, and its livid color, made it horrible. But its horror seemed to be in spite of the face, and beyond its control, rather than a part of its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly at the phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation to which he had been a stranger from infancy, would be untrue. But he had put his hand on the key and relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle. He did pause with a moment's irresolution before he shut the door, and he did look cautiously behind it first, as if he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pigtails sticking out of the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door, except the screws and nuts that held the knocker on. So I said, "Pooh! Pooh!" and closed it with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. Every room above, every cask in the wine merchant's cellar below, appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly too, trimming his candle as he went. He walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection to see of the face to desire to do that. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, a small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and a little saucepan of gruel, Scrooge had a cold in his head, upon the hob. Nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in the dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Lumber room as usual, old fire guard, old shoes, 2 fish baskets washing stand on 3 legs, and a poker. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which is not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. It was a very low fire indeed, nothing on such a bitter night. He was obliged to sit close to it and brood over it before he could extract the least sensation of warmth from a handful of fuel. "Humbug," said Scrooge, and walked across the room. After several turns he sat down again. As he threw his back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell. A disused bell that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now forgotten with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment, and with a strange, inexplicable dread that, as he looked, he saw this bell began to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This might have lasted a minute, or a half-minute, but seemed like an hour. The bells ceased as they had begun together. They were succeeded by a clanking noise, deep, down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and he heard the noise much louder now, on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. "It's humbug still," said Scrooge. "I won't believe it." His color changed, though, when, without a pause, it came on through the heavy doors and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon it coming in, the dying flame leaped up, as though it cried, "I know him! Marley's ghost!" And fell again. The same face! The very same face. Marley in his pigtails, usual waistcoat, tights, and boots, the tassel on the latter bristling like his pigtail, and his coat skirts and the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail. It was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him, and looking through his waistcoat, could see 2 buttons on the coat behind. Scrooge had often heard that it was Scrooge had often heard that it was said that Marley had no bowels, but he never believed it until now. Nor did he believe it, even now, though he looked at the phantom, through and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes, and marked the very texture of the folded kerchief bound around his head and chin, which Rapper had not observed before. He was still incredulous, and fought against his senses. "Oh, now, what do you want with me?"
"Much!"
Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?"
"Ask me who I was."
"Who were you, then? You're particular for a shade." He was going to say to a shade, but substituted this as more appropriate.
"In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley."
Can you sit down?
"I can."
Do it then. Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that, in the event of it being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it.
"You don't believe me."
"I don't."
"What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?"
"I don't know."
"Why do you doubt your senses?"
"Because a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheat. You may be a bit of undigested beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There's more of gravy than grave about you, whatever you are. You see this toothpick?"
"I do."
"You're not looking at it."
"I see it notwithstanding."
"Well, I have but to swallow this, and be for the rest of my days persecuted by a legion of goblins, all of my own creation. Humbug, I tell you, humbug. At this, the spirit raised a frightful cry and shook its chain with such dismal and appalling noise that Scrooge held on tight to his chair to save himself from falling in a swoon. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage round its head, as it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hand in fear before his face. Mercy! Dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me?
Man of the worldly mind, do you believe in me or not?
I do. I must, but why do spirits walk the earth? And why do they come to me?
It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad with his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in light, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world. Oh, woe is me, in witness that what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth and turned to happiness.
Again the spectre raised a cry and shook its chain and wrung its shadowy hands.
Oh!
You're fettered. Tell me why.
I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you?
Scrooge trembled more and more.
Or would you know the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was full as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. December 22nd. You have labored on it, saints. It is a ponderous chain.
Scrooge glanced about him on the floor in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but could see nothing. Jacob! Old Jacob Marley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob.
I have none to give. It comes from other reasons, Ebenezer Scrooge. It is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men, nor can I tell you what I would. Very little more is all permitted to me. I cannot rest, I cannot stay, I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting-house. Mark me! In life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me. Oh! Captive, bound, and double-ironed, not to know that ages of incessant labor by immortal creatures for this earth must pass into eternity before the good of which is susceptible is all developed. Not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Oh. Not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one's life's opportunity misused. Yet such was I, oh, such was I.
You're always such a good man of business, Jacob.
Business? Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business.
It held up its chain at arm's length, as if that were the cause of all its unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again.
Hear me! My time is nearly gone.
I will, but don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowered, Jacob, pray.
I am here tonight to warn you that you may yet have a chance and hope of escaping my fate. A chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer.
You are always a good friend to me, thank you.
Listen. You will be haunted by 3 spirits.
Scrooge's countenance fell almost as low as the ghosts had done. Is this the chance and hope you've mentioned, Jacob?
It is.
I think I'd rather not.
Mhm. Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow, when the bell tolls 1.
Couldn't I take it all at once and have it all over with?
Ugh. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night, when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that, for your own sake, you remember what has passed between us.
When it had said these words, the spectre took its wrapper from the table and bound it round his head as before. Scrooge knew this by the smart sound of its teeth made when the jaw was brought together by the bandage. He ventured to raise his eyes again and found his supernatural visitor confronting him in erectile attitude, with its chain wound over an erect attitude, with its chain wound over and about its arm. The apparition walked backward from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the spectre reached it, it was wide open. It beckoned Scrooge to approach, which he did. When they were within 2 paces of each other, Marley's ghost held up its hand, warning him not to come no nearer. Scrooge stopped, not so much in obedience as in fear and surprise. For on the other raising of the hand, he became sensible of confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret, wailings inexpressibly sorrowful and self-accusatory. The spectre, after listening for a moment, joined in the mournful dirge, and floated out upon the bleak, dark night. Scrooge followed to the window. Desperate in curiosity, he looked out. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste, and moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. Some few, they might be guilty governments, were linked together. None were free. Many had been personally known to Scrooge in their lives. He had been quite familiar with one old ghost in a white waistcoat, with a monstrous iron safe attached to its ankle, who cried piteously at being unable to assist a wretched woman with an infant, whom it saw below, upon a doorstep. The misery with them all was, clearly, that they sought to interfere for good in human matters, and had lost the power forever. Whether these creatures faded into mist, or mist enshrouded them, he could not tell, but they and their spirit voices faded together, and the night became as it had been when he walked home. Scrooge closed the window, and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double-locked, and had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. He tried to say humbug, but stopped at the first syllable, and being from the emotion had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, went straight to bed without undressing, and fell asleep upon the instant. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of the bed he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. He was endeavoring to piece the darkness with his ferret eyes when the chimes of a neighboring church struck the 4 quarters. So he listened for the hour. To his great astonishment, the heavy bell went on from 6 to 7 and 7 to 8, and regularly up to 12, then stopped. 12. It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have gotten in the works. 12. He touched the spring of his repeater to correct the most preposterous clock. Its rapid little pulse beat 12, and stopped. Why, it isn't possible that I can have slept through a whole day and far into another night. It isn't possible that anything has happened to the sun at this 12 at noon. Scrooge lay in this state until the chime had gone 3 quarters more, when he remembered on a sudden that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. He resolved to lie awake until an hour passed, and considering that he could no longer go to sleep than go to heaven, this was perhaps the wisest resolution in his power. The quarter was so long that he was more than once convinced he must have sunk into a doze unconsciously, and missed the clock. At length it broke upon his ear. Ding dong. A quarter past, said Scrooge, counting. Ding dong. Half past. Ding dong. A quarter to it. Ding dong. The hour itself, said Scrooge triumphantly, and nothing else. He spoke before the hour bell sounded, which it now did with a deep, dull, hollow melancholy. 1. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn. aside. And Scrooge, starting up to a half-recumbent attitude, found himself face to face with an unearthly with an unearthly visitor who drew them as close to it as now as I am to you, and I am standing at the spirit of your elbow.
Oh. You are?
I am. It was a strange
Okay.
figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from the view and being diminished to a child's proportions. Its hair, which hung about in its neck and down its back, was white, as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle on it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. The arms were very long and muscular, the hands the same, as if its holds were of an uncommon strength. Its feet and legs were most delicately formed, like those upper members bare. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and in a single contradiction of that wintry album, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright clear jet of light, by which all of this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using, in its duller moments, a great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under its arm. Even this, though, when Scrooge looked at it with increasing steadiness, was not the strangest quality, for as its belt sparkled and glittered, now at one part and now into another, I said that badly, and what was its light one instant, it was another time was dark, so the figure itself fluctuated in its distinctness, being now a thing with one arm, now with one leg, now with 20 legs, now a pair of legs, now without a head, now a head without a body, of which dissolving parts no outline would be visible in the dense gloom wherein they melted away. And in the very wonder of this, it would be itself again, distinct and clear as ever. I want to quickly call attention to the fact that we have never seen a Ghost of Christmas Past that fluctuates to the point of having 20 legs at one point.
Literally.
We should have that. Anyway. Are you the spirit whose coming was foretold to me?
I am.
The voice was soft and gentle, singularly low, as if instead of being so close beside him, it were at a distance. Ooh, and what are you?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Long past?
No, your past.
And what business do you have with me?
Your welfare.
A night of unbroken rest would have been more conductive to that end.
Your reclamation, then. Take heed.
It put out its strong hands as it spoke, and clasped him gently by the arm.
Rise and walk with me.
The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made him towards the window, clasped his robe in supplication. I am mortal. I'm liable to fall.
Bear but the touch of my hand, therefore, there, and you shall be upheld in more than this.
Thank you so much for the subs, everybody.
Oh, hype train. Oh,
Hype train.
that's so scary. Oh.
Christmas hype train. As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon the open country road, with fields on either hand. The city had entirely vanished, not a vestige of it was to be seen. The darkness and the mist had vanished with it, and for a clear, cold winter day with snow on the ground. Oh, good heavens! I was bred in this place. I was a boy here. The spirit gazed upon him mildly. Its gentle touch, though it had been light and instantaneous, appeared still present to the old man's sense of feeling. He was conscious of the 1,000 odors floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares long, long forgotten.
You recollect the way. You recollect. Oh my god.
It's a...
It's a hard one.
God, you guys, thank you so much for the subs. Remember it. I could walk it blindfold.
Strange to have forgotten it for so many years. Let us go on.
They walked along the road, Scrooge recognizing every gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance with its bridge, its church, its winding river. Some shaggy ponies now were seen trotting towards them with boys upon their backs, who called to other boys in country gigs and carts, driven by farmers. All these boys were in great spirits, and shouted to each other until the broad fields were so full of merry music that the crisp air laughed to hear it.
But chatters are the things that have been. They have no consciousness of us.
The Jogan travelers came on. What is that word? I should have looked that up. Came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named every one. Why was he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them? Why did his Cole's eyes glisten and his heart leap up as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas as they parted at the crossroads and byways for several homes? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas! What good had it ever done him?
The school is not quite deserted. A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is still there.
It means cheerful and lighthearted. Interesting. Scrooge said he knew that, and he sobbed. They left a high road by a well-remembered lane and soon approached a mansion of dull red brick. They went, and the ghost and Scrooge, across the hall to the door at the back of the house. It opened before them and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room, made bare still by the lines of plain deal forms and desks. At one of these, a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon a form and wept to see his poor forgotten self, as he used to be. The spirit touched him on the arm and pointed to his younger self, intent upon his reading. He said in a pity for his former self, "Oh boy, I wish..." Scrooge muttered, putting his hands in his pocket, looking at him after drying his eyes with a cuff. But it's too late now.
What is the matter?
Nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should like to have given him something, that's all. The ghost smiled thoughtfully and waved its hand, saying as it did so,
Let us see another Christmas.
Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words, and the room became a little darker and more dirty. The panels of the ceiling... the panels shrunk. The windows cracked, fragments of the plaster fell out of the ceiling, and the naked laths were shown instead. But how was all this brought about, Scrooge knew no more than you do. He only knew that it was quite correct, that everything that happened so, that there he was, alone again, when all the other boys had gone home for the holidays. He was not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly. Scrooge looked at the ghost, with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously toward the door. It opened, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in, putting her arms around his neck, and often kissing him, addressed him as her... Do you remember?
Always a delicate creature, whom a breath might have withered, but she had a large heart.
Do you remember who Fan was?
Fan is played by...
You!
Wait, really?
Apparently.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was a last-minute casting.
it says it in the thing.
Oh,
That's
I
why-
thought I
Yeah.
only got Belle. I'm sorry.
No, it says it right there, Fan.
Am
Last
I
minute
also
casting.
Belle?
Yes. It's very confusing.
Which is a
Don't
little
worry about
weird.
I just,
it. If somebody else wants to
Okay.
take Fan or Belle...
no, it's fine. Just give me like 2 seconds to figure out what Fan's voice is also.
Uh-huh.
And also to find Fan's lines.
Page 19.
19?
Dear brother.
Okay. Dear brother, I've come to bring you home, dear brother. To bring you home.
Home, little Fan.
Yes, home for good and all. Home forever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be. That home's like heaven. He spoke to me so gently. He spoke so gently to me one dear night when I was going to bed that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home. And he said, yes, you should, and sent me in a coach to bring you. And you ought to be a man. And are never to come back here. But first, we're to be together all the Christmas long and have the merriest time in all the world.
You're quite a woman, little Fan. She clapped her hands and laughed, and tried to touch his head, but being too little, laughed again, and stood on tiptoe to embrace him. Then she began to drag him in her childish eagerness toward the door, and he, nothing loth to go, accompanied her.
Always a delicate creature, whom a breath might have withered, but she had a large heart.
So she had. You're right. I'll not gainsay it, Spirit. God forbid.
She died a woman and had, as I think, children.
One child.
Who? Your nephew.
Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind and answered briefly, yes. Although they had been but a moment left the school behind them, they were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city, where shadowy passengers passed and repassed, where shadowy carts and coaches battled for the way, and all the strife and tumult of a real city were. It was made plain enough by the dressings of a shop that here too it was Christmas time again, but it was evening, and the streets were lighted up. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door.
Do you know this place?
No, I was apprentice here. And they went in, at sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind such a high desk that if he had been 2 inches taller, he must have knocked his head against the ceiling. Scrooge cried in great excitement, "Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig alive again!" Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked upon the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself from his shoes to his organ of benevolence, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice,
Yo-ho there! Ebenezer! Dick!
And Scrooge's former self, now grown a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice. Dick Wilkins, to be sure! Bless me, yes, there he is! He was very much attached to me, that Dick. Poor Dick, dear, dear.
Yo-ho, my boys! No more work tonight! Christmas Eve, Dick! Christmas, Ebenezer! Let's have the shutters up before a man can say Jack Robinson!
I guess that was just an expression back then. You wouldn't believe how those two fellows went at it. They charged into the street with the shutters. 1, 2, 3, had 'em up in their place. 4, 5, 6, barred 'em and pinned 'em. 7, 8, 9, and came back before you could have gotten to 12, panting like racehorses.
Hilly-ho! Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here. Hilly-ho, Dick! Cheer up, Ebenezer!
There was nothing that would have cleared away, nor could have cleared... Wait, what? There's nothing they wouldn't have cleared away, or couldn't have cleared away, with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off, as it were dismissed from public life forevermore. The floor was swept and watered, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped on a fire, and the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry as a ballroom, as you would desire to see such on a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book and went up to a lofty desk and made an orchestra of it, and tuned like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast substantial smile. In came 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid with a cousin and the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend, the milkman. In came the boy from over the way, who was suspected of not having board enough for his master, trying to hide himself behind the girl from next door, but one who was proved to have her ears pulled by her mistress. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. Away they went, 20 couple at once, hands half round the back again and other ways, down the middle and up again, round and round in various stages of affectionate grouping, old top couples always turning up in the wrong place, new top couples starting off again as soon as they got there. All top couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them. There were dances, and there were forfeits, and more dances, and there was cake, and there was something, I don't know what that word is, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies and plenty of beer. When the clock struck 11, the domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwigs took up their station, one on either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired but the 2 apprentices, they did the same to them, and thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under a counter in the back shop. During the whole of this time, Scrooge acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene with his former self. He corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and underwent the strangest agitation. It was not until now, when the bright faces of his former self and Dick were turned from them, that he remembered the ghost and became conscious that it was looking full upon him, while the light upon his head burnt very clear.
A small matter. It makes these silly folks so full of gratitude.
Small? The spirit signed to him to listen to the two apprentices, who were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig, and when he had done so, said,
Why, is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves his praise?
"Isn't that?" said Scrooge, heated by the remark and speaking unconsciously like his former, not his latter self. "It isn't that, Spirit. He had the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count him up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as the cost of the fortune."
What is the matter?
"Nothing particular."
Something, I think.
No, I should like to say a word or two to my clerk just now, that's all." His former self turned down the lamps and gave utterance to that wish. As he gave utterance to that wish, and Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air.
My time grows short. Quick!
This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone who could see, but it was produced by an immediate effect. For again Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of his life. His face had not the harsh and rigid lines of latter years, but it had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in the eye, which showed the passion that had taken root where the shadow of the growing tree would fall. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a mourning dress, in whose eyes there were tears which sparkled in the light that shone out the ghost of Christmas past.
It matters very little. Very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve.
What idol has displaced you?
A golden one.
It's the even-handed dealing of the world. There is nothing of which it is so hard as poverty, as there is nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth.
You fear the world too much. All your other hopes have merged into the hope of being beyond the chance of its sordid reproach. I have seen your noble aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion, gain, engrosses you. Have I not?
What then? Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I'm not changed towards you. She shook her head. Am I?
Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so until, in good season, we could improve our worldly fortune by our patient industry. You are changed. When it was made, you were another man.
I was a boy!
Your own feeling tells you that you were not what you are. I am. That which promised happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and how keenly have I thought of this, I will not say. It is enough that I have thought of it and can release you.
Have I ever sought release?
In words? No, never.
In what then?
In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end, in everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. If this had never been between us, tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now? No!
He seemed to yield to the justice of the supposition, in spite of himself, but he said with a struggle, "You think not?"
I would gladly think otherwise if I could. Heaven knows! When I have learned a truth like this, I know how strong and irresistible it must be. But if you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can even I believe that you would choose a dowerless girl? You, who, in your very confidence with her, weigh everything by gain, or choosing her, if for a moment you were false enough to your one guiding principle to do so. Do I not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do, and I release you, with a full heart, for the love of him you once were.
Was about to speak, but with her head turned from him, she resumed.
You may. The memory of what is past half makes me hope you will. Have pain in this. A very, very brief time, and you will dismiss the recollection of it gladly as an unprofitable dream, from which it happened well that you awoke. May you be happy in the life you have chosen.
She left him, and they parted. Spirit, show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me?
One shadow more.
No, no more. I don't wish to see it. Show me no more.
I told you. These were shadows of the things that have been. That they are what they are. Do not blame me.
Remove me. I cannot bear it. He turned upon the ghost, and seeing that it looked upon him with a face, which in some strange way there were fragments of all the faces it had shown him, wrestled with it. Leave me! Take me back! Haunt me no longer! In the struggle, if that can be called a struggle, in which the ghost with no visible resistance on its own part was undisturbed by any effort of its adversary, Scrooge observed that its light was burning high and bright, and dimly connecting that with its influence over him, he seized the extinguisher cap, and by a sudden action pressed it down upon its head. The spirit dropped beneath it, so that the extinguisher covered its whole form. But though Scrooge pressed it down with all its force, he could not hide the light which streamed from under it in an unbroken flood upon the ground. He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further, of being in his own bedroom. He gave the cap a parting squeeze, in which his hand relaxed, and had barely time to reel to bed before he sank to a heavy sleep. Is this where I put the intermission? Weird.
Yeah.
Huh. Totally would be better after Christmas Present.
Do you want to go for Christmas present then intermission?
Let's do Christmas Present, then intermission. Let people
it.
Sink on the... It's a great transition. Thank you for all the head pats, everybody. I'm trying to lean into them since it's a little out of place.
I think you put it here because this is the halfway point in the script you wrote.
Right. Let's keep going. Awakening in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was again upon the stroke of 1. He felt that he was restored to consciousness in the right nick of time for the especial purpose of holding a conference with a second messenger dispatched to him through Jacob Marley's intervention. But finding that he had turned uncomfortably cold when he began to wonder which of his curtains this new spectre would draw back, he put them every one aside with his own hands, and lying down again, established a sharp look around the bed. For he wished to challenge the spirit on the moment of its appearance, and did not wish to be taken by surprise and made nervous. When the bell struck 1 and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour went by, yet nothing came. All this time he lay upon his bed, the very core and center of a blaze of ruddy light, which streamed upon it when the clock proclaimed the hour, and which being only light, was more alarming than a dozen ghosts, as he was powerless to make out what it meant, or would be at, and was sometimes apprehensive that it might be at the very moment of an interesting case of spontaneous combustion, without having a consolation of knowing it. At last, however, he began to think, as you or I would have thought at first, for it is always the person not in the predicament who knows what ought to have been done in it, and would unquestionably have done it too. At last, I say, he began to think that the source of the secret of this ghostly light might be in the adjoining room, from whence, on further tracing it, seemed to shine. This idea taking full possession of his mind, he got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door.
Enter!
He obeyed. It was his own room, there was no doubt about that, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceilings were so hung with living green that it looked like a perfect grove, from every part of which bright, gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back to the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there. And such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney at the dull petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, or for many winter seasons gone. Heaped upon the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausage, minced pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12 cakes, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with the delicious steam. In easy state upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up, high up to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the corner.
Come in, and know me, better man.
Scrooge entered timidly, and hung his head before the spirit. It was not the dogged Scrooge he had been, and though the spirit's eyes were clear and kind, he did not meet them.
I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me.
Scrooge reverently did so. It was clothed in one simple green robe or mantle, bordered with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capacious breast was bare, as if disdaining to be warded or concealed by any artifice. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of the garment, were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath, set there as there were shining icicles. Its brown, dark curls were long and free as the genial face. Its sparkling eyes, its open hands, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanor, and its joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up by rust. That's a metaphor for
You
peace.
have never seen the like of me before.
Never.
Have never walked forth with the younger members of my family, meaning, for I am very young, my elder brothers, born in these later years.
Don't think I have. I'm afraid I have not. You had many brothers, Spirit?
Oh, more than 1,800.
Tremendous family to provide for. Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion and learned a lesson, which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it.
Touch my robe!
Scrooge did, as he was told, and held it fast. Holly, mistletoe, red berries, ivy, turkey, geese, game, poultry, brawn, meat, pigs, sausages, oyster pie, pudding, fruit punch, all vanished instantly. So did the room, the fire, the ruddy glow, the hour of the night with which they stood the city streets on Christmas morning, where people made rough but brisk and not unpleasant kind of music in scraping the snow from the pavement in front of their dwellings, and from the top of their houses, whence it was mad delight to the boys to see it come plopping down at the road below, and splitting into artificial little snowstorms. For the people who were shoveling away on their housetops, they were jovial, full of glee, calling out to one another from the parapets, and now and then exchanging a facetious snowball, better-natured missile far than any worldly jest, laughing heartily as if it went right, and not less heartily if it went wrong. The poulterer's shop was still half open, and the fruiterers were radiant in glory. There were great round pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts, shaped like the waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen, lolling at the doors and tumbling out into the streets with their apoplectic. That's a fun word. I'm going to put that in my vernacular. Apoplectic opulence. There were ruddy, brown-faced, broth-girthed Spanish onions, shining in the fatness of the growth like Spanish friars, and winking from their shelves in wanton slyness at the girls that went by, and glanced demurely.
The onions were winking?
The onions were winking, and glanced demurely at the hung-up mistletoe. There were pears and apples, clustered high in blooming pyramids. There were bunches of grapes, made in shopkeepers' benevolence to dangle from conspicuous hooks, that people's mouths might water gratis as they passed. But soon the steeples called good people all to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes and with the gayest faces. And at the same time there emerged scores of by-streets, lanes, nameless turnings, innumerable people carrying their dinners to baker's shop. The sight of these poor revelers appeared to interest the spirit very much, for he stood with Scrooge beside them in a baker's doorway, and taking off the covers as the bearers passed, sprinkled incense on the dinners with his torch. And it was a very uncommon kind of torch, for once or twice when there were angry words between some dinner carriers who had jostled each other, he shed a few drops of water on them from it, and their good humor was restored directly. For they said it was a shame to quarrel on Christmas Day, and so it was. God love it, so it was. In time the bells ceased and the bakers shut up, and yet there was a genial shadowing forth to all these dinners and the progression of their cooking, in a thawed blotch of wet above each baker's oven, where the pavement smoked as if its stones were cooking too. Is there a peculiar flavor in what you sprinkled from that torch?
There is. My own.
Would it apply to any dinner on this day?
To any kindly given. To a poor one most.
Why to a poor one most?
Because it needs it most.
Spirit, I wonder you, of all the beings in the many worlds about us, should desire to cramp these people's opportunities of innocent enjoyment.
Aye.
You would deprive them of their means of dining every 7th day, often the only day with which they can be said to dine at all, wouldn't you?
Aye.
You seek to close these places on the 7th day, and it comes to the same thing.
I seek.
Forgive me if I am wrong. It has been done in your name, or at least in that of your family.
There are some upon this earth of yours who lay claim to know us, and who do their deeds of passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in our name, who are as strange to us and all our kith and kin as if they had never lived. Remember that, and charge their doings on themselves, not us.
Scrooge promised he would, and they went on invisible, as they had been before, into the suburbs of town. It was a remarkable quality of the ghost, which Scrooge had observed at the baker's, that, notwithstanding his gigantic size, he could accommodate himself to any place with ease, and that he stood beneath a low roof quite as gracefully and like the supernatural creature as it was possible he could have done in a lofty hall. And perhaps it was the pleasure of this good spirit in showing of this power, or else it was his own kind, generous, hearty nature, and his sympathy with all poor men that led him straight to Scrooge's clerks. For there he went, and took Scrooge with him, holding his robe, and on the threshold of the door the spirit smiled and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with a sprinkling of his torch. Think of that! Bob had but 15 bob a week himself. He pocketed on Saturdays but 15 copies of his Christian name, and yet the ghost of Christmas present blessed his 4-room house. Then upon the rose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed out in the poorly but twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a godly show for 6pence. And she laid the cloth assisted by Belinda Cratchit, the second of her daughters, and also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes, getting in the corners of his monstrous shirt collar, Bob's private property conferred upon his son and heir in honor of the day, into his mouth, rejoiced to find himself so gallantly attired, and yearned to show his linen in the fashionable parks. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose, and known it for their own, and basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, these young Cratchits danced about the table, and exalted Master Peter Cratchit to the skies, while he, not proud, although his collars nearly choked him, blew the fire, until the slow potatoes bubbling up knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled.
What has ever got your precious father, then? And your brother, Tiny Tim? And Martha warn't as late as Christmas Day by half an hour.
Oh yeah, who's Martha?
Huh?
Who's Martha?
Martha is played by Loops, who is playing every Cratchit child.
I am. Sponsor, mother!
This was a good decision.
Mhm.
It's a great decision.
Yeah.
This is inaudible.
It literally is inaudible. You gotta tone the voice down a little. You're coming through like a dog whistle.
Mother! Hurrah! There's such a goose, Martha!
Amazing.
Lord. Let's see, where were we? Why, bless your heart alive, my dear. How late you are!
Mrs. Cratchit kissed her a dozen times and took off her shawl and bonnet from her with a vicious zeal.
Work to finish up late. Last night, actually, fish up like that. And had to clear away this morning, Mother.
Well, never mind so long as you're come. Sit ye down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm, Lord bless you.
No. There's father coming. Hide, Martha, hide.
Though Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter exclusive of the fringe hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim on his shoulders. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch and had his limbs supported by an iron frame.
Why? Where's our Martha?
Not coming.
Not coming? Not coming upon Christmas Day.
Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, if it only were a joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while the 2 young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off to a wash-house so that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper.
And how did Tim behave?
Oh, as good as gold. And better. Somehow he gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me, coming home, that he hoped the people saw him in the church, because he was a cripple and it might be pleasant to them to remember, upon Christmas Day, who made lame beggars walk and blind men see.
His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to a stool before the fire. And while Bob, turning his cuffs, as if, poor fellow, they were capable of being made more shabby, compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons and stirred it round and round, and put it on the hob to simmer, Master Peter and the 2 ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, which they had soon returned in high procession. The dishes were set on, and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it into the breast. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose around all the boards, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the 2 young Cratchits, beat on the table with their hands of his knife, and feebly cried, "Hurrah!" There was never such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavor, size and cheapness were all the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said, with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone upon a dish, they hadn't ate it all at last. Yet every one had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows. But now the plates were being changed by Miss Belinda. Mrs. Cratchit left the room again alone, too nervous to bear witness, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Hello! A great deal of steam! The pudding was put out of the copper in half a minute. Mrs. Cratchit re-entered, flushed but smiling proudly, with the pudding like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in half of half a quartern of ignited brandy, and bedighted with Christmas hollies stuck on top. A wonderful
Pudding!
Bob Cratchit said, and calmly too, that he regarded as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. It's weird that none of this was written as dialogue. Mrs. Cratchit said that now the weight was off her mind, she would confess that she had her doubts about the quantity of the flour. Everyone had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought it was at all a small pudding for a large family. It would have been flat heresy to do so. Any Cratchit would have blushed at the hint of such a thing.
A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us.
All the family re-echoed.
God bless us, everyone.
He sat very close to his father's side upon the little stool. Bob held his withered little hands in his, as if he loved the child, and wished to keep him by his side, and dreaded that it might be taken from him. Spirit, tell me if Tiny Tim will live.
I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die.
No, oh no, kind spirits say he will be spared.
If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race will find him here. What then? If he be like to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population.
Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief.
Man, if man you be in heart, not adamant, forbear that wicked cant until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is. Will you decide what men shall live, what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. Oh God, to hear the insect on the leaf pronouncing on the too much life among his hungry brothers in the dust.
Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and trembling cast his eyes upon the ground, but he raised them speedily upon hearing his own name.
Ting, 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 to Mr. Scrooge! I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast.
A founder of the feast, indeed. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it.
My dear, the children, Christmas Day.
It should be Christmas Day, I am sure, on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge.
What?
You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, you poor fellow.
My dear, Christmas Day.
I'll drink his health for your sake and the day's, not for his. Long life to it. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt.
The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care for tuppence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for a full 5 minutes. There was nothing of high mark in this. They were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time, and when they faded, and looked happier yet in the bright sprinklings of the spirit's torch at parting, Scrooge had his eyes upon them, and especially Tiny Tim, until the last.
Ha ha! Ha!
It was a great surprise to Scrooge, when thus engaged, to hear a hearty laugh. It was much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in the bright, gleaming room with the spirit standing, smiling beside him, and looking at the same nephew with approving affability. It is a fair, even-handed, noble adjustment of things that while there is an infection and disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious of laughter and good humor. When Scrooge's nephew laughed in this way, holding his sides, rolling his head, and twisting his face in the most extravagant contortions, Scrooge's niece by marriage laughed as heartily as he, and their assembled friends, being not a little bit behindhand, roared out lustily.
He said Christmas was a humbug, as I live, and he believed it too.
Poor shape for him, Fred.
He's a comical old fellow, that's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offences carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him.
Oh, I'm sure he's very rich, Fred. At least you always tell me so.
What of that, my dear? His wealth is of no use to him. He don't do any good with it. He don't make himself comfortable with it. He hasn't the satisfaction of thinking that he is ever going to benefit us with it.
I have no patience with him.
All the other ladies expressed the same opinion.
Yes.
Oh, I have. I'm sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself. Always. Here, he takes it into his head to dislike us. And he won't come and dine with us. What's the consequence? He don't lose much of a dinner.
Indeed. I think he loses a very good dinner.
Everybody else said just the same, as they must be allowed to have been competent judges, because they just had the dinner, and with the dessert upon the table were clustered round the fire by lamplight.
Well, I'm very glad to hear it.
Do go on, Fred. He never finishes what he begins to say. He's such a ridiculous fellow.
Scrooge's nephew reveled in another laugh, as it was impossible to keep the infection off.
I was only going to say that the consequence of his taking a dislike to us and not making merry with us is, as I think, that he loses some pleasant moments, which could do him no harm. I am sure he loses pleasanter companions than he can find in his own thoughts, either in his moldy old office or his dusty chambers. I mean, to give him the same chance every year, whether he likes it or not, for I pity him. He may rail at Christmas until he dies, but he can't help thinking better of it. I defy him if he finds me going there in a good temper year after year and saying, "Uncle Scrooge, how are you?" If it only puts him in the vein to save his poor clerk £50, that's something. And for the record, I think I shook him yesterday.
It was their turn to laugh, now at the notion of him shaking Scrooge. But being thoroughly good-natured and not much caring what they laughed at, so that they laughed at any rate, he encouraged them with merriment, and passed the bottle joyously. After tea, they had some music, for they were a musical family and knew what they were about. Scrooge's niece played well upon the harp and played among other tunes a simpler little air, a mere nothing you might learn to whistle in 2 minutes, which had been familiar to the child who fetched Scrooge from the boarding school, as he had been reminded by the ghost of Christmas past. When this strain of music sounded, all the things that the ghost had shown him came upon his mind. He softened more and more and thought, if he could have listened to it often, years ago, he might have cultivated the kindness of life, for his own happiness with his own hands, without resorting to the sexton's spade that buried Jacob Marley. But they didn't devote the whole evening to music. After a while, they played many games. For it's good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child himself. Scrooge's niece was not one of the first few rounds, but was made comfortable with a large chair and a footstool, in a snug corner where the ghost and Scrooge were close behind her. But she joined later in forfeits, and loved to admiration with all the letters of the alphabet. Likewise at the game of how, when, and where. She was very great, and to the secret joy of Scrooge's nephew, beat her sisters hollow, though they were sharp girls too. There might have been 20 people there, young and old, but they all played, and so did Scrooge, for wholly forgetting, in the interest he had what was going on, that his voice made no sound in their ears. He sometimes came out with his guess quite loud, and very often guessed quite right too, for the sharpest needle, best Whitechapel warranted not to cut in the eye, was not sharper than Scrooge, blunt as he took it in the head to be. The ghost was greatly pleased to find him in this mood, and looked upon him with such favor that he begged like a little boy to be allowed to stay until the guests departed. But this, the spirit said, could not be done. Here's a new game. 1/2 hour, spirit. Only one. It was a game called Yes and No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what. He only answered their questions yes or no, and the case was, the brisk fire of burning questions to which he was exposed elicited from that he was thinking of an animal. A live animal? A rather disagreeable animal, a savage animal, an animal that growled and grunted sometimes, and talked sometimes, and lived in London, and walked about the streets, and wasn't made a show of, and wasn't led by anyone, and didn't live in a menagerie, and was never killed in a market, and was not a horse, or an ass, or a cow, or a bull, or a tiger, or a dog,
no.
Or a pig.
No.
Or a cat.
No.
Or a bear.
No.
At every fresh question that was put on him, this nephew burst into a fresh roar of laughter, and was so inexpressibly tickled that he was obliged to get up from the sofa and stamp. At last, Scrooge's niece's sister, falling into a similar state, cried out,
I've found it! Ooh, I know what's this, Fred. I know what's this.
What is it? What is it?
It's Uncle Scrooge.
It certainly was. Admiration was the universal sentiment, but some objected that the reply to "isn't an ass" ought to have been yes, inasmuch an answer in the negative was sufficient to have diverted their thoughts from Mr. Scrooge, supposing they had ever had any tendency that way.
He has given us plenty of merriment, I am sure. And it would be ungrateful not to drink his health. Here's a glass of mulled wine, ready to our hand at the moment, and I say, Uncle Scrooge!
Well,
Uncle Scrooge!
A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, whatever he is. He wouldn't take it from me, but he may have it nevertheless. Uncle Scrooge!
Uncle Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay and light of heart, they would have pledged the unconscious company in return, and thanked them in an inaudible speech, if the ghost had given him time. But the whole scene passed off in a breath of the last words spoken by his nephew, and he and his spirit were once again upon their travels. Much as they saw, and far as they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirits stuck beside sick beds, and they were cheerful. On foreign lands, and they were close at home. By struggling men, and they were patient of their great hope. By poverty, and it was rich. In almshouse, hospital, and jail, in misery's every refuge, where vain man, in his little brief authority, had not been made fast at the door, and barred the spirit out, he left his blessing, and taught Scrooge his precepts. It was a long night, if it were only a night, but Scrooge had his doubts of this, because the Christmas holidays appeared to have condensed into the space of time they passed together. It was strange, too, that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older. Scrooge had observed his change, but never spoke of it, until they left a children's 12th night party, when, looking at the spirit, as they stood together in an open place, he noticed that its hair was gray. Spirits' lives so short?
My life upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight.
Tonight?
Tonight, at midnight. Hark, the time is drawing near.
The chimes were ringing to 11:15 at that moment. Forgive me if I'm not justified in what I ask, but I see something strange and not belonging to yourself protruding from your skirt. Is that a foot or a claw?
It might be a claw, for what little flesh is there upon it. Look here.
From the foldings of its robe it brought 2 children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment.
You man, look here. Look down here.
They were a boy and a girl, yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate, too, in their humility. Where graceful youths should have filled their features out and touched them with freshest tints, a stale and shriveled hand, like that of age, had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. Where angels might have sent enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacingly. No change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade, though all the mysteries of wonderful creation has monsters half so horrible and dread. Scrooge started back, appalled, having shown to him in this way. He tried to say they were fine children, but words choked themselves rather than be parties to lie of such enormous magnitude.
Get wrecked.
Spirit, are they yours?
They are mad, and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance, and this girl is want. Beware them both, and all of their degree, but most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased. Deny it, slander those who tell it ye, admit it for your factious purposes and make it worse, and abide the end.
Have they no refuge or resource?
Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?
The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. And we're going to take a little intermission. Take this time to, go potty, get some water, whatever y'all have to do.
Are we still live while we're doing an intermission?
I'm not going to mute or deafen on Discord, so yes.
Okay.
We have a little chats if we want to.
Or continue eating cheese.
I do need to use the bathroom. I'll be right back.
Okay, bye. Love you.
All right.
I should have figured out how long this intermission would have lasted first.
No, you sent us all away.
Nah, yeah, I just said, scatter, have fun.
And we ran.
Mm-hmm. Man, there's a lot of food imagery in this. While we have a little break, I do want to talk about a few things that I cut from the script, because they were either buck wild and didn't make any sense, or were just plain mean-spirited. First among them was the first time Scrooge saw his younger self. The characters in his storybook came to life and started celebrating Christmas with him.
Oh.
Starting with Alibaba, and that was just weird. But I don't know, I'm not Charles Dickens. But you know what, that's in, like, of the 40-something versions of A Christmas Carol that I have watched this holiday season, that was in one, and it was weird.
Listen, Dickens was paid by the letter.
I thought that was Mark Twain.
It was also Dickens.
Incredible. Because I did cut, like, a lot. I did not cut Smoked Bishop. Smoked Bishop is in the final act.
Good.
Let's see. I did cut... There was one scene where the Ghost of Christmas Past... This is in no version of A Christmas Carol. I've seen dozens. This is nowhere, because it's just mean and, like, rude. The Ghost of Christmas Past shows Scrooge one more scene, and it's just that Belle remarried, and is very happy with her new husband.
That is kind of rude.
It's just mean. What's he supposed to do about that? What's he supposed to learn?
He's just supposed to be sad.
That is kind of where it
I
off.
think that her husband should have been making direct eye contact with Scrooge while they were having sex.
That's the thing, is her and her husband have the conversation of, hey, I ran into your old pal Scrooge the other day. He's looking awful.
You're doing terrible. Wow. Oh, that's so fun, though.
It is so fun.
I'm so sad that nothing has the toothpick line.
Nothing has the toothpick line. It is so much more funny to expound there's more gravy than grave about you, and then follow it with, I could eat this toothpick and I would see goblins for the rest of my life. Like, what a deranged thing to say and do.
Scrooge is crazy. He's a
nuts.
crazy guy.
And he's so fun.
Oh my god, so fun.
I think it's...
Ugh. Are we even going to talk about this on stream, like all of the Christmas carols we've watched?
We've got to talk about it eventually, because we are nearing
We got
50.
it. We have to do another podcast where we just talk about the literal dozens of Christmas carols we watched this month.
Yep, we go from bottom to top, which were the best. And I guess we can include the Charles Dickens Christmas Carol, since we're basically reading it.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Mm-hmm. By the way, the worst one's Spirited. That's probably not going to change. The worst one's Spirited.
Spirited is so bad. It's so mean to the story. It was clearly written by people who think that Scrooge should have not changed as a person. It's wild. It's written by a bunch of executives that should have been visited by 3 ghosts instead of writing a book about it.
It's like we're not even against like cynical takes of A Christmas Carol, because there's like mean-spirited ones that we still liked.
Is the Muppets one the best one? We don't know yet because we're saving it for last.
Yes,
but almost definitely.
It's the best one, but we don't know that yet, technically.
Yep. What is number 1 on our list right now? Just out of curiosity. I'm gonna check. Nope, that is not the right thing. There's like 4 files on my Google Docs right now that are labeled Christmas Carol. Number 1 is currently Bill Murray's Scrooged. Yeah, that's fair.
It's just a fun one.
It is.
And that one's also, like, relatively mean-spirited.
Mm-hmm. And Bill Murray does kiss people in it.
Yes!
Mm.
It's just a fun version.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fun, cynical, modern take.
Mm-hmm. It's very fun that the best and the worst currently on our list is a cynical modern take on A Christmas Carol.
Mm-hmm. We also have a lot of like TV show and cartoon parodies.
Yep.
And those are in the toilet.
It is insane, like the variation of how good or bad they can be.
Sadly, though, we are only watching one version of An Annoying Orange Christmas Carol.
There were 2, but we only watched the minute 31, and I was like, I feel like it made me feel like I just woke up from a fever dream.
Yeah.
Like, that's just how it is. It's just like frantic and stressful and inescapable. That is what Annoying Orange feels like.
I think the worst cartoon reference parody episode using their canon characters was, I want to say the worst one was the movie Smurfs special.
The Smurfs special was very interesting because we were very passionate about it, where we thought Scrooge was right.
It's the only one where we thought he was right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, of all of them, only one he was right.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the only one where he was, like, objectively in the right for being upset with Christmas.
Stupid.
It's nuts.
It's so stupid.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get to it, though.
Yeah, we'll get to it. We don't have Scrooge defenders. We have, what was his name? What was his name? There it is. Grouchy, played by George Lopez. We're Grouchy defenders.
Very passionate about it.
Mm-hmm. I can't wait to talk about how right Grouchy is for hating Christmas.
He was right.
Objectively so.
Full stop right.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when we go through these, we're definitely going to talk about how weird it is that some of these things even have concepts of Christmas.
Yes. Chief among them, Flintstones.
Hey, wait a minute.
What is
literally
Christmas
how on
holiday?
earth could that work?
It's so ridiculous.
Are we all back?
Yep, your cast has returned.
All right. Well, without further
Sexy.
ado, shall we have a spooky final ghostly chapter? This is the part where
Let's get into our board houses, ladies.
This is where I flicker the lights, I guess is what they do, right?
Yes.
Nosferatu.
All right, here we are. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the very air through which the spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save for one outstretched hand. But for this, it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night, and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded. He felt that it was tall and stately where it came beside him, and that its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved. I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come? The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand. You're about to show me the shadows of the things that have not happened but will happen in the time before us. Is that so, spirit? The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant in its folds, as if the spirit had inclined its head. That was the only answer he received. I fear you more than any specter I've seen, but as I know your purpose is to do me good, as I had hoped to live, to be another man from what I was, I'm prepared to bear you company, and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me? They gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them. Lead on. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit. The phantom moved away as it had come towards him. Scrooge followed in the shadow of its dress, which bore him up, he thought, and carried him along. They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up around them, and encompass them of its own act. But there they were in the heart of it, unchanged, amongst the merchants, who hurried up and down, and chinked the money in their pockets, and conversed in groups, and looked at their watches, and trifled thoughtfully with the great gold seals, and so forth, as Scrooge had seen them often. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing that their hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk.
No, I don't know much about it either way. I only know that he's dead.
When did he die?
Last night, I believe.
Why? What's the matter with him? I thought he'd never die.
God knows.
What has he done with his money?
I haven't heard. Left it to his company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me, that's all I know.
Pleasantry was received with a general laugh.
It's likely to be a very cheap funeral, but upon my life, I don't know anybody to go to it. Suppose we make a party. Volunteer.
I don't mind going, if a lunch is provided. But I must be fed if I make one.
Another laugh.
Well, I am the most disinterested among you, after all, for I never wear black gloves and I never eat lunch. But I'll offer to go if anybody else will. When I come to think of it, I'm not at all sure that I wasn't his most particular friend, for we used to stop and speak whenever we met. Bye-bye.
Speakers and listeners strolled away and mixed with other groups. Scrooge knew the men, and looked about in the very place for his own image. But another man stood in his accustomed corner, and though the clock pointed to his usual time of day for being there, he saw no likeness of himself among the multitudes that poured in through the porch. It gave him little surprise, however, for he had been revolving in his mind a change of life, and thought and hoped he saw his newborn resolution carried out in this. Quiet and dark, beside him stood the phantom, with its outstretched hand. When he roused himself to the thoughtful quest, he fancied from the turn of the hand, and its situation in reference to himself, that the unseen eyes were looking at him keenly. It made him shudder and feel very cold. They left the busy scene and went to an obscure part of town where Scrooge had never penetrated before, although he recognized its situations and its bad repute. The ways were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, the people half-naked, drunken, slipshod and ugly. Alleys and archways, like so many cesspools, disgorged their offences of smell and dirt and life upon the straggling streets, and the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth and misery. Far in this den of infamous resort, there was a low-browed, beetling shop below a penthouse roof, where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were brought. Upon the floor within were piled up heaps of rusty keys, nails, chains, hinges, files, scales, weights, and refuse iron of all kind. Sitting in among the wares he dealt in, by a charcoal stove made of old bricks, was a grey-haired rascal, nearly 70 years of age, who had screened himself from the cold air without by a frowsy curtaining of miscellaneous tatters hung upon a line, and smoked his pipe in all the luxury of calm retirement. Scrooge and the phantom came into the presence of the man, just as a woman, with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black, who was no less startled by the sight of them than they had been upon the recognition of each other. After a short period of blank astonishment, in which the old man with a pipe had joined them, they all three burst in a laugh.
You too.
Ha
Good job.
Let the charwoman alone to be the first. Let the laundress alone be the second. And let the undertaker's man alone be the third. Look here, old Joe. Here's a chance. If we haven't all three met here without meaning it.
You couldn't have met in a better place. Come into the parlor. You made free of it long ago, you know. And the other two ain't strangers. Stop till I shut the door of the shop. How it squeaks! Such a rusty bit of metal in the place of its own hinges, I believe. And I'm sure there's no such old bones here as mine. We're all suitable to our calling. We're well matched. Come into the parlor. Come into the parlor. The parlor was the space behind the screen of rags. The old man raked the fire with an old stair rod, and having trimmed his smoky lamp with the stem of his pipe, put it in his mouth again. When he did this, the woman who had already spoken threw her bundle of wood on the floor, threw her bundle on the floor, and sat down in a flaunting manner on a stool, crossing her elbows on her knees, and looking with a bold defiance at the other two.
What odds, then? What odds, Mrs. Dinver? Every person has the right to take care of themselves. He always had.
That's true indeed. No man more so.
Then why, then? Why stand staring as if you were afraid, woman? Who's the wiser? We're not to pick holes in each other's coats, I suppose.
No, indeed.
I should hope not.
Very well, then. That's enough. Who's the worse for who's the worse for the loss of a few things like those? Not a dead man, I suppose.
No, indeed.
If he had warned to keep him after he dead, a wicked old screw, why wasn't he natural in his time? If he had been, he had someone to look over after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying gasping out his last days there alone by himself.
It's the truest word that ever once spoken. It's a judgment on him.
I wish it was a little heavier judgment. It should have been. You may depend on it. If I could have had laid my hands on anything else. Open that bundle, old Joe. Let me know the value. Speak up, sign. I'm not afraid to be the first. Not afraid of them to say it. We knew pretty well that we were helping ourselves before we met here, I believe. It's no sin. Open the bundle, Joe.
But the gallantry of her friends would not allow of this, and the man in faded black, mounting his breech first, produced his plunder. It was not extensive. A seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value were all. They were severally examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked up the sums he was disposed of to give to each upon the wall, and added them up to a total, which he found there was nothing more to come. That's your account. I wouldn't give it another 6 pence if I was to be boiled for not doing. Who's next? Mrs. Dilber was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner. I always give too much to the ladies. It's a weakness of mine, and that's the way I ruin myself. That's your account. If you asked me for another penny and made it an open question, I'd repent of being so liberal to knock off half a crown.
No one do my bundle, Joe.
Oh, what you call this? Bed curtains?
Bed curtains.
You don't mean to say you took him down? Rings and all with him just lying there?
Oh, yes, I did. Why not?
You were born to make your fortune, and you'll certainly do it.
I certainly shan't hold my hand, but I can get anything in it by reaching out for the sake of such a man as he was. I promise you, Joe. Don't drop that oil upon the blankets now.
His blankets?
Who's else do you think? He isn't like to take cold without them, I dare say.
Ugh. Sure hope he didn't die of anything catching it.
Don't be afraid of that. I ain't so fond his company that I'd bother about him for such things. If he did, you may look through that shut to your eyes, but you won't find a hole in it, nor a threadbare place. It is best that he had, and a fine one too. They've been washed, if it hadn't been for me. Wasted, they've been wasted.
What do you call wasting of it?
Putting it on him to be buried in. To be sure. Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. If calico ain't good enough for such a purpose, it ain't good enough for anything else. It's quite the becoming of the body. He can't look uglier than he did in that one.
Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror, as they sat grouped about their spoils, in the scanty light afforded by the old man's lamp. He viewed them with a detestation and disgust, which could hardly have been greater, though they had been obscene demons, marketing the corpse itself. Spirit, I see. This case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this? He recoiled in terror, for the... Oh, I'm sorry, let me do that again. Let me do that, but reread. Spirit, I see. This case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this? There we go. It's written like that in the book. That's not like a script issue. It just suddenly goes one sentence into a completely different thing. That was weird.
Cool.
He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bed. A bare, uncurtained bed, on which beneath a ragged sheet there lay a something covered up, which, though it was dumb, announced itself in awful language. The room was very dark, too dark to be observed with any accuracy, though Scrooge glanced round it in obedience to his secret impulse, anxious to know what kind of room it was. A pale light, rising in the outer air, fell upon the bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. Scrooge glanced towards the phantoms. Its steady hand was pointed to the head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, the motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face. He thought of it, felt how easy it would be to do, and longed to do it, but had no more power to withdraw the veil than to dismiss the spectre at his side. He lay in the dark, empty house with not a man, a woman, or a child to say that he was kind to me in this or that, and for the memory of one kind word, I would be kind to him. A cat was tearing at the door, and there was a sound of gnawing rats beneath the hearthstone. What they wanted in the room of death, and why they were so restless and disturbed, Scrooge did not dare to think. Spirit, this is a fearful place. In leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson. Trust me. Let us go. Still, the ghost pointed with an unmoved finger to the head. I understand you, and I would do it if I could, but I have not the power, Spirit. I have not the power. Again, it seemed to look upon him. If there is any person in town who feels emotion caused by this man's death, show me that person. Spirit, I beseech you. The spirit spread its dark robe before him for a moment like a wing, and withdrawing it revealed a room by daylight, where a mother and her child were. She was expecting someone with anxious eagerness, for she walked up and down the room, started at every sound, looked out for the window, glanced at the clock, tried in vain to work her needle, and could hardly bear the voices of the children at in their play. We forgot to give these people voice actors, by the way.
Yeah, so what are you gonna do?
Who want it?
We got him.
We got him.
They got him.
You
At
got
length,
it.
the long-expected knock was heard. She hurried to the door and met her husband, a man whose face was careworn and depressed, though he was young. There was a remarkable expression in it now, a kind of serious delight of which he felt ashamed and which he struggled to repress. He sat down to the dinner that had been hoarding for him by the fire, and when she asked him faintly what news, which was not until after a long silence, he appeared embarrassed how to answer.
Is it good or bad?
Bad?
We're quite ruined.
No, there is hope yet, Carolyn.
If he relax, there is. Nothing is past hope if such a miracle has happened.
Well, he is, past relenting. He is dead.
Oh,
Why Goofy?
I would not have called that a goofy voice.
Yeah, it sounded like
It sounded more like, It wasn't goofy, though.
Okay. She was a mild and patient creature if her face spoke truth, but she was thankful in her soul to hear it, and she said so with clasped hands. She prayed forgiveness the next moment and was sorry, but the first was the emotion in her heart.
What the half-drunk woman whom I told you of last night said to me when I tried to see him and obtain a week's delay, and what I thought was a mere excuse to avoid me, turns out to have been quite true. He was not only very ill, but dying then.
To whom will our debt be transferred?
I don't know, but before that time we shall be ready with the money, and even though we were not, it would be bad fortune indeed to find so merciless a creditor and his successor. We may sleep tonight with light hearts, Carolyn.
Yes, soften it as they would, their hearts were lighter, their children's faces hushed and clustered round to hear what they so little understood were brighter, and it was a happier house for this man's death. The only emotion that the ghost could show him, caused by this event, was one of pleasure. Let me see some tenderness connected with the death of that dark chamber spirit, which we just left now, will be forever with me. The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet. As they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated round the fire. Quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and the daughters were engaged in sewing, but surely they were very quiet. The mother laid her work on the table and put her hand up to her face.
The color hurts my eyes. They're better now again. It makes them weak by candlelight. I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for the world. It must be near his time.
Stick right there, but I think he was walking a little slower than he said he used to these last few meetings, Mother.
You want to take that again?
This is Peter. This is the oldest of the kids.
Fine.
He's like 20.
I don't know. I'm just playing all the children. I don't have descriptions for all of them
The one that stage direction I just labeled vague Cratchit babies, that's a perfect voice for.
Okay.
Yeah. But Peter's like a character.
Peter's the guy.
Peter's a dude.
He has a job. He pays taxes.
Well, it's implied that he might steal things and sell them at pawn shops. But
He has a job.
okay,
That's-
still a job.
I said rather, but I think he has walked slower, a little slower than he used to these last few evenings, Mom.
I've known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed.
And so have I, often. Oi! Oi!
But he was very light to carry, and his father loved him so that It was no trouble. No trouble. And there is your father at the door.
She hurried out to meet him, and little Bob, in his comforter, he had need of it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him to it most. Then the two young Cratchits got upon his knees and laid each child a little cheek against his face, as if they said, "Don't mind it, father, don't be grieved." Bob was very cheerful with them and spoke pleasantly to all his family. He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and speed of Miss Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Sunday, he said.
Sunday? You went today then, Robert?
Yes, my dear. I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on a Sunday. My little child!
He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and his child would have been farther apart, perhaps, than they were. He left the room and went upstairs into the room above, which was lighted cheerfully and hung with Christmas. There was a chair set close beside the child. There were signs of someone having been there lately. Poor Bob sat down in it, and when he thought a little and composed himself, he kissed the little face. He was reconciled to what had happened and went down again quite happy. They drew about a fire and talked, the girls and Mother still working. Bob told them of the extraordinary kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew, whom he had scarcely seen but once, and who, meeting him in the street that day, and seeing that he looked a little...
Just a little down, you know, on which, for he is the pleasantest spoken gentleman you ever heard. I told him, "I am heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit," he said. "I'm heartily sorry for your good wife." By the by, however he knew that, I don't know.
What, my dear?
Why, that you were a good wife.
Oh, everybody knows that.
It's supposed to be your
That
kid
was
complimenting
me.
Oh, shoot.
That
Peter
was
said
me.
that!
you.
Everybody knows that. Ugh.
Very well observed, my boy. I hope they do. "Heartily sorry," he said, "for your good wife. If I can be of service to you in any way," he said, giving me his card, "that's where I live. Pray come to me." Now, it wasn't for the sake of anything he might be able to do for us, so much as for his own kind way, that this was quite delightful. It really seemed as if he had known our Tiny Tim. It felt with us.
I'm sure he's a good soul.
You would be sure of it, my dear, if you saw and spoke to him. I shouldn't be at all surprised, mark what I say, if he got Peter a better situation.
Oh, only hear that, Peter.
And then Peter will be. And then Peter will be keeping the company as he wants. And setting up for himself. Go along with you.
It's just as likely as not one of these days. There's plenty of time for that, my dear. But however and whenever we part from one another, I'm sure that none of us forget poor Tiny Tim, shall we? Or this first parting that there was among us? Children?
Oh. Father.
I know, my dears, that when we recollect how patient and how mild he was, although he was a little child, we shall not quarrel easily among ourselves. Forget poor Tiny Tim in doing it.
No, Father.
I am very happy. I'm very happy.
Mrs. Cratchit kissed him. His daughters kissed him. The two young Cratchits kissed him, and Peter and himself shook hands. just a polite business handshake. Spectre,
Wow.
something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me what that man that was whom we saw lying dead. The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him as before, though at a different time, he thought. Indeed, there seemed to be no order in these latter visions. save that they were in the future, into the resorts of businessmen, but showed him not himself. Indeed, the spirits did not stay for anything, but went straight on, as if to the end, just now desired, until besought by Scrooge to tarry for a moment. This court, through which we hurry now, is where my place of occupation is, and has been for a length of time. I see the house. Let me behold what I shall be in days to come. The spirit stopped. The hand was pointed elsewhere. The house is yonder. Why do you point away? The inexorable finger underwent no change. Scrooge hastened to the window of his office and looked in. It was an office still, but not his. The furniture was not the same, and the figure in the chair was not himself. The phantom pointed as before. He joined it again, wondering why, and whither had he gone. Accompanied it until they reached an iron gate. He paused to look around before entering. A churchyard. Here, then, the wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay underneath the ground. It was a worthy place, walled in by houses, overrun by grass and weeds, the growth of vegetation's death, not life, choked up with too much burying, fat with repleted appetite, a worthy place. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. He advanced toward it, trembling. The phantom was exactly as it had been, but he dreaded that he saw new meaning in its solemn shape. Before I draw nearer to the stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be? Or are they shadows of things that may be, only? Still, the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood. Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends, to which, if persevered in, they must lead, but if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me. The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. Am I the man who lay upon the bed? The finger pointed to the grave to him, and back again. No, spirit, no! The finger was still there. Spirit, hear me! I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must be been for this intercourse. Why show me, if I'm past all hope? For the first time, the hand appeared to shake. Good spirit, he pursued, as down upon the ground he fell before it. Your nature intercedes me and pities me. Assure me that I may yet change these shadows you've shown me by an altered life. The kind hand trembled. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons they teach. Oh, tell me that I may sponge away the writing on the stone. In his agony, he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strong in his entreat and detained it. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him. Holding up his hands in prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down to a bedpost. Yes, a bedpost. His own bedpost. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to make amends in. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, Jacob Marley! Heaven and Christmas time will be praised for this. I say it on my knees. Oh, Jacob, on my knees! Scrooge cried, folding one of his bed's curtains in his arm. They're not torn down. Rings and all, they're here. I'm here. The shadows of the things that would have been may be dispelled. They will be. I know they will. His hands were busy with his garments all the time, turning them inside out, putting them on upside down, tearing them, mislaying them, making them parties to every kind of extravagance. I don't know what to do. I'm as light as a feather. I'm happy as an angel. I'm merry as a schoolboy. I'm giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody. A Happy New Year to the world. Hello! Woo! Hello! He had frisked into his sitting room and was now standing there perfectly winded. There's the saucepan where the gruel was in. There's the door which the ghost of Jacob Marley entered. There's the corner where the ghost of Christmas present sat. That's the window where the wandering spirits were. It's all right. It's all true. It all happened. I don't know. I don't know what day of the month it is. I don't know how long I've been with the spirits. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby. Never mind. I don't care. I'd rather be a baby. Hello there. He was checked in his transports by the churches ringing out in the lustiest peals that had ever been heard. Clash, clang, hanger, ding, dong, bell, ding, dong, hammer, clang, crash. Oh, glorious, glorious. Rushing to his window, he opened it and pulled out his head. No fog, no mist, clear, bright, jovial, stirring cold. Cold piping, the blood to dance to. Golden sunlight, heavenly sky, sweet fresh air, merry bells. Oh, glorious, glorious day. You, boy! What's today? Cried Scrooge.
Are you not going to say the narrator part?
Cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes, who perhaps had loitered in to look about.
Eh?
What's today, my fine fellow?
Today? Why, Christmas Day!
It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything they like. Oh, of course they can. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow.
Hello!
Do you know the poulterers in the next street? Not the one on the corner.
I sure hope I did.
An intelligent boy, a remarkable boy. Do you know whether they sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one.
What, the one as big as me?
What a delightful boy! It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck.
It's hanging there now.
Is it? I'm going by it.
Walker?
No, I'm in earnest. Go buy it and tell them to bring it here, that I may give them direction where they take it. Come back with a man and I'll give you a shilling. I'll come back in less than 5 minutes and it'll be a half-crown. The boy was off like a shot. He must have had a steady hand at the trigger who could have shot off that so fast. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit. He shan't know who says it. Oh, it's twice the size of Tiny Tim. The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did somehow, and went downstairs to open to the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. As he stood there waiting his arrival, the knocker caught his eye. I shall love it as long as I live. I scarcely ever looked at it before. What an honest expression it has in its face. It's a wonderful knocker. Here's the turkey. Hello! How are you? Merry Christmas! It was a turkey. Never could have stood upon its legs, that bird. It would have snapped him short off in a minute like sticks of a sealing wax. Oh, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town. You must have a cab. The chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy, were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again, and chuckled till he cried. He dressed himself all in his best, and at last got out onto the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present, and walking with his hands behind him. Scrooge regarded everyone with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant, in a word, that 3 or 4 good-humored fellows said, "Good morning, sir, a Merry Christmas to you." And Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he ever heard, those were the blithest in his ears. He had not gone far, when coming on towards him he beheld the portly gentleman who had walked into his counting-house the day before and said, "Scrooge Bartley's, I believe." It sent a pang across his heart to think how this gentleman would have looked upon him when they met. But he knew what path lay straight before him, and he took it. "My dear sir, how do you do? I hope you succeeded yesterday. It was very kind of you. A Merry Christmas to you, sir."
Mr. Scrooge?
Yes, that's my name. I fear it may not be pleasant to you. Allow me to ask your pardon, and will you have the goodness? Here Scrooge whispered in his ear.
Lord bless me! My dear Mr. Scrooge, are you serious?
If you please, not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in it, I assure you. Will you do me that favor?
Oh, my dear sir, I don't know what to say to such
Don't
munificent...
say anything, please. Come and see me. Will you come and see me?
Why, will!
Thank you. I am much thank you. I'm much obliged to you. I thank you 50 times. Bless you. He went to the church and walked about the street and watched the people hurrying to and fro and patted children on their head, questioned beggars, and looked down into the kitchens of houses and up the windows, and found that everything could yield him pleasure. He'd never dreamed that any walk, that anything, could give him so much happiness. In the afternoon, he turned his steps toward his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock, but made a dash, and he did. Is your master at home, my dear?
Yes, sir.
Where is he, my love?
He's in the dining room, sir, along with mistress. I'll show you upstairs, if you please.
Thank you. He knows me. I'll go in here, my dear. He turned the dining room's doorknob gently and sidled his face in round the door. They were looking at the table, which was spread out in a great array, for these young housekeepers are always nervous on such points and like to see that everything is right. Fred? Dear heart alive, how his niece by marriage started. Scrooge had forgotten for that moment how her sitting in the corner with a footstool, or he wouldn't have done it on any account.
Why, bless my soul. Who is that?
It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred? Let him in? It is a mercy. He didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. So did everyone when they came. Wonderful parties, wonderful game, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late. That was the thing that set his heart upon. And he did it. Yes, he did. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1:15. No Bob. He was a full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with the door wide open that he might see him come into the tank. His hat was off before he opened the door, his comforter too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen, as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. What do you mean, coming in here at this time of day?
I am very sorry, sir. I am behind my time.
You are. Yes, I think you are. Step this way, sir, if you please.
It's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir.
Now, I'll tell you what, Cratchit, I am not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, I am about to raise your salary! Bob trembled, and got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him and calling to the people in the court for help in a straitjacket. A Merry Christmas, Bob! Merry Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, that I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family. We'll discuss your affairs in the very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop. Bob, make up the fires. Buy another coal scuttle before you do another before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit. And Scrooge was better than his word. He did all that and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. he was a second father. He became as good a man, as good a master, and as good a friend as the good old city ever knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh, and little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in the outset. And knowing that such as these would be blind anyway, he thought it quite as well that they should wrinkle up their eyes in grins and have a malady in less attractive forms. His own heart laughed, as that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, but lived upon total abstinence principle even afterwards, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that truly be said of us, and of all of us. And so as Tiny Tim observed,
God bless us, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Wow!
That was wonderful.
Wow.
Yay!
King Rob
It's
Loops, give
beginning to
yourselves a
feel a lot
pat
like Christmas.
give yourselves a pat on the back. Take a bow, even though you can't really do that.
Well,
Yeah.
I've been King 3D.
I've been the Sun Goddess Ra.
Loop.
And I'm still Kid Squids. And that was our wonderful Christmas time, everybody. Go out and make merry. Shame about the ghost abstinence. Really weird choice of words. Right at the end, I didn't proofread that line. That's a weird line. But thank you so much, everybody, and have a wonderful night.
Oh,
Yay!
yeah!
Happy December 22nd!
Happy December 22nd!
And pizza!